do have the privilege to ask Dr. Thobane, whom I simply just know as Nolo. I cannot pronounce her name, and many years ago she said to me, Willie, if you cannot pronounce my name, I will go by the name Nolo. So Dr. Thobane, with any ado, can you please switch on your microphone and then you can do the opening for us. Thank you very much.
Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Mr. Clark. Thank you very, very much. Yes, my full name is Mahlogonolo, which means blessings in Setswana, which is my language. But I did actually make it simple for Willie and other colleagues and said if they can pronounce the full name, they are welcome to call me Nolo. So I will, as Willie stated, will do the opening. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, students, esteemed guests, members of the International Society for the Study of Rural Crime, welcome to the Roundtable webinar on rural crime in Africa. First and foremost, I would like to extend a heartfelt appreciation to the esteemed executive members of the International Society for the Study of Rural Crime. Your dedication to advancing research and understanding in this field is commendable, and your insights are invaluable in shaping our collective knowledge. We also extend our gratitude to the Criminology Research Fellow academics whose tireless efforts have paved the way for innovative approaches to rural safety. Your commitment to scholarly inquiry and dissemination has enriched our understanding of the complexities surrounding rural communities. To the law enforcement officers from Australia, New Zealand, and other countries, and especially South Africa, we sincerely thank you for your unwavering commitment to ensuring the safety and security of rural areas. Your courage, dedication, and expertise are instrumental in safeguarding the well-being of our communities. Furthermore, we acknowledge the media's vital role in amplifying voices of rural communities, raising awareness and fostering dialogue on rural safety issues. Your efforts in informing and engaging the public are pivotal in initiating discourse and driving positive change. Last but not least, we recognize the importance of students and emerging scholars in shaping the future of rural research and safety initiatives. Your enthusiasm, fresh perspectives, and dedication to learning are crucial in addressing the rural community's evolving challenges. Before we delve into our discussions today, we must express our gratitude to those who have contributed significantly to the discourse on rural safety and community well-being. As we convene for today's webinar, it's essential to recognize a challenge that often goes unnoticed in the broader discourse of criminology, Africa's unique criminological landscape, deeply rooted in the continent's rich history and diverse cultures. Africa's rural criminology is intricately woven into the very fabric of its societies, yet it often remains overshadowed by dominant Western paradigms. By hosting webinars like this, we aim to spotlight Africa's rural criminological perspectives and methodologies, seeking to foster a deeper understanding and appreciation for the complexities of crime and justice on the continent. We acknowledge the diverse voices and experiences of African scholars, practitioners, and communities who contribute invaluable insights to the field of criminology. Your expertise and perspectives are vital in challenging conventional narratives and enriching global discourse on crime and safety. Your collective contributions form the backbone of our efforts to promote rural safety, foster community resilience, and build a brighter future for all. We are honored to have each one of you join us today, and we look forward to engaging in insightful discussions that will further our shared goals. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And we are now providing Dr. Kyle Mulrooney of University of New England in Australia, just to do a brief introduction into rural criminology. And yeah, Kyle also has his challenges, so we are going to look at a recording that has been sent to us. And we do hope that within the next couple of minutes, we will get the moderator into the webinar. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and enjoy the presentation by Dr. Mulrooney from Australia. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Kyle Mulrooney. I'm from the University of New England, where I...
Can you hear that, Willie?
Yes, we can. Thank you very much, Alistair.
Excellent. Thank you.
Co-director Center for Rural Criminology. I'm speaking to you in my capacity today as a past president of the ISSRC, who's overseeing this event, of course, coordinated by Dr. Willie Clack. Willie asked me to speak today primarily around rural criminology and its future directions, which seemed a big task for 10 minutes. But luckily I have been working on some research in that space. So I've been thinking about this a little bit lately in a piece that I've been writing with colleagues on access to justice in rural spaces, as well as for the forward for Wendell Wallace's book on policing in global context that I've written together with Matthew Baden. But for the short time that I have, I think I'd just like to make two key points, which I hope will set the tone well for tonight, and I think really aligns well with the panel we have and some of the talks that we'll hear. And that is that our understanding of rural crime and justice must be one that is both broad and global. And so what do I mean by broad? Here I'll focus on the concept of access to justice. And if we think about the tyranny of distance of rural communities, this often means a lack of access to justice. We can really think about this very specifically conceived as criminal justice. So the resourcing of police, courts, legal representation and access to it in rural communities, and the differences between urban and rural spaces, and therefore the experiences of communities. But I think we need to consider this more broadly when we're considering access to justice in rural communities. And here we can especially consider the availability and access to services which often have a close relationship with crime. And here is developed along a continuum as well, right? We can think of those more immediately, those services that more immediately come to mind, whether they be drug and alcohol services or services in relation to domestic and family violence or youth engagement, these types of things that often are absent from rural communities, all the way through to more health-based services, whether it be very specific mental health services or access to healthcare, period. I live, work, and raise a family in a rural community now here in Armidale for going on 7 years. My own experience of the tyranny of distance in terms of access to healthcare, for example, of making 12-hour return trips to access healthcare. And that's just one, my own privileged example. But I think the point here I'm trying to make is that we need to understand how the tyranny of distance may be experienced in aggregate, more holistically, and how this then can impact on aspects of crime environments, including on individual health and well-being, through to community health, connectedness, and solidarity, all of which we know very much impacts upon crime. The second point is that a rural criminology should be global. And here I've titled that local to global and back again. And I'll tell you a little bit of what I mean about that. It's not just an urban-rural divide in criminology, which we tend to focus on. That is the sort of hyper or broad focus of much criminological research on the urban, usually at the expense of the rural. But there's another issue of imbalance within criminology, and that's an imbalance of place and space. Professor Joe Donnemeyer has pointed out the big four of rural criminology being the United States, Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom, where much of the research and research output in rural criminology has come from and has focused on. And this poses a really distinct challenge, especially to a rural criminology which emphasizes the centrality of place and space, but is missing so much of the global place and space. And I think this is especially important when we consider that no two spaces, rural or otherwise, are identical, and the differences, whether they be historical, geographic, economical, sociocultural, are going to express themselves in differential crime patterns and justice responses. And this can be very true at the local level. Here we can consider the example of Armidale, where I live, compared to Narrabri, which is a town about 250 kilometers away, just a short jaunt by Australian standards. Armidale is quite a unique regional and rural center, very international in nature, in large part because it's home to the International University of New England. Contrast it to Narrabri, whose economy is very much built around mining. That means quite a transient part of the community, particularly fly in and fly out workers. And these distinct differences will very much shape demographic patterns and other aspects, which will then shape the crime environments as well as capacity to respond to particular types of offending. And then if we take this one step further, what does a place in rural New South Wales have in common with a place in rural South Africa? I think a lot and not much at the same time. They both will feel the tyranny of distance from the power centers and the associated lack of access to services and resources that I spoke about in terms of access to justice. But these local characteristics that we will find there mean that there is a very spatial uniqueness to crime and criminal justice. And we just have to look at Willie's work, for instance, comparing rural crimes in South Africa and New South Wales with particular attention to stock theft. But the point I'm really trying to make here is that understanding the particular nuances and challenges of rural criminal justice in a variety of settings depends on recognizing this spatial uniqueness. And so to fully understand crime in rural communities is to understand the local to the global and back again. And I think this is quite emblematic of the International Society for the Study of Rural Crime. It is a place for a broad and global understanding of rural crime. It includes various people doing rural work, not just rural criminologists. And this can be conceived of in terms of academics doing research in public health spaces or in youth justice or across a variety of disciplines coming together, not necessarily as criminologists, but people who are interested in and care about the well-being of rural spaces, and together how we can sort of move rural crime or the study of rural crime along in that regards. It's also representative of varied individuals, from academics to practitioners to people who live in rural communities. The second part of that is its global representation, and that's its inclusiveness of people from around the world. The society is truly international representation of rural criminology, and much of its efforts since its development in 2019 have been focused here, and that is the sort of focus of the continued efforts going forward as well. And I think especially this panel here tonight is a shining example of this, and kudos to Willie and the team for organizing and the speakers for their willingness to participate. But we see both the broad and global nature of rural criminology in the representation of the speakers. South Africa, Kenya, Australia, Wendell Wallace representing the University of the West Indies. I'm sure in the audience we've got an even greater global representation. We can think about the broad and global representation of the subject matters that you will hear about tonight, from typologies of rural crime in Africa and scientific knowledge for policing, with particular attention to livestock, to the ramifications of the victimization of livestock theft, as well as to relationships between farmers and the police. So I'll leave you with those thoughts. I hope that structured the conversations that will flow from tonight. The last thing I'll do is give a plug to the ISSRC and to encourage you to get involved if you have an interest in pursuing a study of rural crime that is both broad and global. Do join up, check out the website, do email us or contact us, or better yet, get directly involved. All right, thank you very much.
Sorry, Dr. Wallace is in the meeting at the present moment. We thank Alistair and Kyle for that presentation. And then without any further ado, I am going to hand over this webinar to Dr. Wallace from the West Indies to carry on with the rest of the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Willie, and my apologies for being a bit late. I had some technical difficulties, so my apologies to all those persons in the audience. Willie, just kindly inform me as to who is the next speaker, please.
Dr. Wallace, we are at the moment where we are going into the first official speaker to Dr. Bunei from Australia. Or shall I say Kenya?
Okay, thanks a lot. So I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Bunei. So let me just give you a brief background into Dr. Bunei. Dr. Emmanuel Bunei is a Kenyan citizen as well as a distinguished scholar from New England University. His academic prowess and dedication to understanding the rural crime dynamics, more so in Kenya, have earned him widespread recognition. Emmanuel's scholarly journey is not just marked by his commitment, but also by the profound impact of his research on the complexities of rural crime and its impact on African communities. His contribution to the field of criminology is recognized and celebrated, as in 2023, he was awarded the prestigious Joe Donnemeyer Research Award. And this is a testament to his scholarly excellence and unwavering dedication. At this time, he will be addressing the issue of rural crime in Africa, typologies, current state challenges, and opportunities. Let me take this opportunity to introduce and to welcome Emmanuel to you at this time. I hand you over to Emmanuel, and I look forward to his very extensive research and learning more about crime in Africa. Emmanuel?
Thank you so much, Dr. Wallace, for just a very wonderful introduction. I'm trying to share my screen briefly. Okay, good evening, everyone. Good morning. My name is Emmanuel Bunei. As you have been introduced, I am from Kenya, and I've done a lot of research about rural crimes, more importantly about livestock theft in Kenya, and also critically on about the opportunistic nature and the way it's organized. So today I just want to talk briefly about a paper we wrote recently. It's part of one of the book coming soon with Willie. And I'm just trying to shed light on the rural crimes in Africa. And I will start off by giving you some introduction about Africa, to give you some background about Africa, and then the reason why we need to focus on rural areas and rural communities. Then I will give you some brief state of rural crime research in Africa. Then I delved into typologies of rural crimes in Africa and just narrow down to some which are dominant and unique. And then I will look briefly at the trends of rural crimes in Africa. Then briefly look at rural policing, type of strategies and all those things. Then look at some methodological approaches that have been used to study rural crimes in Africa. Then lastly, look at the challenges and provide you some opportunities for gaps that we need to study as a rural crime practitioners or academicians or anyone working on rural crime. Africa actually is complex as not merely a country. It's composed of 54 states, and it's second largest continent in the world, and it's the second most populated country. It has four major regions, but sometimes you have a Central Africa region. But the most one is Western, Eastern, Central, and Southern Africa. And more than 50% of the people live in rural areas. And in some states, it can be as high as 85%. And by 2050, it is estimated that a quarter of global population will reside in Africa. That's 25% of the world population. So this statistics shows to us that we cannot study rural criminology or study rural crime globally, and we miss to focus on Africa. So it's important that Africa is put in the map of rural criminology. And this underscores why this webinar is very important, as it helps to shed out about some unique complex rural crimes in Africa. What's the state of rural criminology research in Africa? Yeah, I start by saying that criminology is an expensive interdisciplinary field. It actually can be studied from all the directions. Sometimes I'm intrigued when I get somebody from food science being studying criminology, or somebody from medical science focusing on criminology, and all those things. So it's an expansive disciplinary field, and therefore in Africa, generally Africa faces a lot of significant crime problems, and there are some existing rural crime researchers in Africa, which includes me and some other people. So we have to focus on this state of this rural crime research in Africa. And one of the most empirical findings which I have found about this is mostly in Africa, in Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya. And these are the where we get a lot of information about rural crime in Africa. And so what's the state? Most of the rural crime studies in Africa actually originate on the Southern, Eastern, and Western Africa. And if you narrow down, it goes back to the 3 states, that's South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya. But there are some emerging states like Ethiopia, some Tanzania, and Ghana. There are some significant studies there. But we have also to look at some empirical studies which are not typically rural crime focused, but they tend to focus on rural communities, and they tend to focus on rural areas. So as we speak now, most of the rural criminology research is still at development, it's still a nascent stage, and it's still scattered in many disciplines. So what are the typologies of rural crimes in Africa and the dominant ones? Yes, like other rural crimes, agricultural crimes still tops of it, livestock and crop theft. And when we look at livestock theft, as we will look later, there is what you call cattle rustling. In other states in the world, it's called cattle duffing, but it's livestock theft. But in Africa, we tend to have what you call cattle raiding. Cattle raiding is just a cattle theft, whereby people from one community go for another community and raid it. But as we speak now, it has actually changed to a very, very organized crime. And it is an entrepreneur. Back in my country, Kenya, I remember there is a lot of challenge now because there's a lot of business people involved in cattle rustling. It's no longer a cultural thing. It's no longer a sport that was used to do some basic things to do with either marrying, dowry, and all those things. We have also what we call maritime piracy, and this mostly happen with those countries along the ocean, and it tend to happen mostly in remote regional coastal lines, whereby pirate people live in these remote oceans, remote rural areas, and they try as much as possible to waylay a ship and divert, especially illegal arms and goods to sell. In Nigeria, we have what we call religious extremism, and this all has to do with people using religion for their own benefits. In East Africa, we have Al-Shabaab terrorizing people, and most of the time you look at it, they tend to emanate from rural areas, or sometimes they tend to come from rural communities and then go to urban centers. Or sometimes they come from urban centers and they retreat to rural areas. Wildlife crime is another one. And this one, Africa has also become another victim of wildlife crime. And more importantly, it has to do with an international syndicate, a multi-billion-dollar industry. I remember in my country, we have a problem with poaching of especially elephant tusk and rhinos. And we have another one to do with saddlewood tree. And beneficiaries are mostly African countries, but it's other countries. It's a global business. We have a very unique one in South Africa, and perhaps it's only happening in South Africa. Sometimes it's called farm attacks, sometimes it's called farm murder, and it's actually a specific type of rural crime that need to be studied so much and need to be focused on it because it has some connotations to the purpose of people doing farm murder. sometimes it's not specifically to do with making farmers to be productive, or sometimes it's used for displacement. And I relate farm attacks to what's happening in Kenya. People are using cattle rustling for other purposes, not to gain, but for displacement, for margin votes, and sometimes for their own selfish gain, political leadership. And lastly, we have illicit proliferation, circulation, and trafficking of small arms, and sometimes light weapons. You go to these countries, especially those in Central Africa and part of Congo and South Sudan, there is a problem of small arms. Shortly, I will discuss how small arms and trafficking of small arms and circulation is actually related to other rural crimes. But there is all those things. There is also to do with corruption, and there is also terrorism. But these are highly sophisticated. So when you look at trends of rural African crime, the first one, and which is increasing at higher rate, is that there is always a black market business crime syndicate in it. And it's very organized. It involves those products which are highly demanded, which are highly of value, and therefore fetches a lot of money. And I'll give you an example of them. One of them is elephant tusk, ivory tusk, in terms of rhino. Saddlewood is another one. Coffee is another interesting one. When you go to my country in Kenya, Uganda, people steal coffee and sell it because it's highly demanded and quickly sold. Another trend in African rural crime is that it's very highly organized, and it's no longer opportunistic, but it's tending to be an only organized, involving more than one person, and sometimes the purpose is either for money or for political issues that are intertwined with cattle or that theft. And I'll give an example of, in my country, Kenya, people engage in cattle theft to realign communities for purposes of voting. Sometimes cattle theft is used to displace people, and maybe the government have scouted a very important resource, and that resource is important for purposes of development and all those things. So political leaders, selfish political leaders, sometimes may engage in cattle theft for purposes of displacing community and having an opportunity to benefit for them project. Another very important trend which is emerging is that it is used for a lot of multi-purpose. It's no longer about money. Example of cattle theft, I've said about that, but sometimes it can be used for population displacement, it can be used for resource capturing, it can also be used for purposes of either sending a message to the political leaders, and sometimes you find very interesting purposes for these rural crimes. Another important point to look at it is sometimes highly connected to corruption among law enforcers. So corruption sometimes play a role in these rural crimes. And another important point again to look at it is there is always resistance to some laws which can come because a local cultural thing has been criminalized. Yeah, and one example is the female genital mutilation. Yeah, for some time, it has been accepted in some countries in Africa, but when it is criminalized, there's always chances of resistance, and sometimes it creates a lot of problem to the African law enforcers. And lastly, some of the rural crime in Africa are highly connected to politics, like exploitation of natural resources here. And one of the interesting things which we need to learn more about is in Congo, about natural resources. There's always some politics in it. You go to South Sudan, rural areas again, in terms of terrorism and organized crime, there's always connected to some politics. Either there's an election coming or there's something which is happening. Yeah. So generally, these are the trends about African rural crime. But when we move now to look at rural policing, it's interesting. And one of the important points to come out from this is that policing strategies in Africa, in some countries, is a blend of informal and formal policing. Formal policing is actually where we use the police, we use the formal system of criminal justice system. But sometimes we have informal. And it comes because sometimes there's what we call Ubuntu in African setup and African communities. And this is a situation whereby we believe in living together, we believe in coexisting, and we live in that. And this has come up with one of the challenges. There is non-reporting of agricultural crimes, especially livestock theft and crop theft. Also, there is problem with getting evidence. You get some residents being uncooperative, and sometimes the law enforcers have difficulties in getting evidence to prosecute some crimes. And sometimes, I remember back in my country, 2018, there was criminalization of female circumcision. But now the government had difficulties in getting evidence because the communities were uncooperative in providing evidence. And lastly, there's a preference sometimes for informal policing or for conflict resolution. And this is because it's cheap and faster. But sometimes this goes against the formal laws because the government have always run into problem where people have committed serious crimes like murder in the process of cattle thefting or rape in the process of cattle thefting. And sometimes you get communities sometimes negotiating, and this is a serious issue which need more studies to be done. Yeah. And another important policing which we should take is that there is always an emergence of sometimes informal policing, which sometimes is illegal. And some of these illegal policing are actually group of people organizing to self-policy. And the major reason why the people come together to self-policy, community come together to self-policy, sometimes the state fails to provide adequate policy, especially in remote, rural African regions. And sometimes there's poor political leadership. So we have what we call village vigilantes. Sometimes there are groups which come together to protect the community. And we have some examples. In Kenya, we have what we call Mungiki and sometimes Sungusungu in Kenya. We have the Arab boys in Uganda. These are informal, illegal policing groups. And also, there's always a challenge of corruption, where the law enforcers support crimes in rural areas. Yeah. Some methodological approaches to study rural crime in Africa, which have been done. Yeah, we reviewed some papers and we found out that 53% of papers have used mixed methods to frame and study rural crime. Also, there's less use of quantitative studies and it tend to have small sample size, especially for countries which don't have criminal statistics or proper census records. We also found out that there's various disciplines which have studied these crimes and they have been published. The only problem is that it's solo. It's a silo way of studying rural crime. In terms of geographical scope, most of the rural crimes in Africa originate from South, East, and Western Africa. And more so, there is dominance of two countries, South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya. Yes, I accept that other countries who have done research, like Ethiopia and Tanzania, they're actually coming very fast in terms of rural crime. But the dominance of these three countries is visible. And lastly, in terms of theories that I've used to study rural crime, most are the common theoretical framework. But there are some theories which have been used which are criminological in nature. One of them is social disorganization theory and routine activity theory, and sometimes rational choice theory. So you can see there's some attempts to do these studies via the criminological theories. What are the challenges? Yeah, there are three major challenges. The first one is that sometimes it's very, very difficult to have a clear and meaningful definition of case or concept under study, like what's rural. And this is common for most of the rural criminology scholars. Who is a farmer actually? Sometimes you go to certain countries like Africa, a farmer can be defined in many ways. Maybe somebody is just doing farming. Yeah, look at those who own cattle in remote regions. Yeah, sometimes they don't call themselves farmers. They think to see it's as crop farmers and all those things. Violence against women, female circumcision and all those things, cultures and all those things. There's always a difficulty in defining a concept. And this is not specific to Africa, but it's also mainly discipline. The next one is that, and I've said earlier, there's lack of consistent and comprehensive criminal statistics. You go to certain countries, it's hard to get a comprehensive summaries of criminal statistics. And sometimes, and I'll give you an example of my country, Kenya. You get cattle theft. It's just cattle theft, but they cannot break it down to specifically what is it. Yeah. And lastly, and mostly affects countries apart from South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya, it's lack of proper internet and unreliable postal address. And that's why sometimes you find out that we tend to use more of physical interviews. Lastly, what are the opportunities that exist for people to study rural crime in Africa? The first one is we need to expand these rural crime studies beyond the dominant countries. It will be very interesting for us to understand what's happening in Central Africa, what's happening in South Sudan, what's happening in Chad, what is happening in Central African Republic, Far West, what's happening in Senegal, what's happening in Ghana, also in North Africa, Tunisia, Morocco, and Nigeria. But for North Africa, because it's dominated by Arabic-speaking countries, more likely maybe there exists some rural criminological studies in North Africa, which is in Arabic language. Another opportunity for us to study is cross-national studies. These are studies that cut across one country. It will be interesting for us to study one study to combine about cattle rustling in East Africa and come up with one picture.
Time, Emmanuel.
Okay, I'm finishing. It will also be interesting to study about rural communities that exist in more than one multiple jurisdiction. We have some communities which are sharing the same culture, but they are in different countries, like the Maasai of Kenya and the Maasai of Tanzania. How do they experience this common crime across different jurisdictions? Another opportunity is we need to explore more about the presence of armed forces in rural areas and their role in facilitating organized crime and serious crime like human kidnapping, wildlife crime, and sometimes cattle theft. And lastly, we need to incorporate other disciplines and have a one project about rural crimes, not people like psychologists studying on their own and publishing on their own, but an interdisciplinary combining one or more than one scholars from different disciplines. Yeah, so that's all about me. Thank you so much, and I leave it at that.
Okay, thank you so much, Emmanuel, for that really enlightening presentation. I'm certain the audience that they have learned quite a lot. Indeed, I have learned quite a lot about rural crime in Africa. So quickly, just some of the takeaways. Emmanuel spoke about the trends in rural crime, how corruption, need for policies, lack of political will, data challenges, etc., and the very organized nature of crime in the rural realm, how it impacts rural crime in Africa. So thanks again, Emmanuel, for that presentation. So moving quickly along, we have Professor Witness Maluleke. I hope that I got the pronunciation very correct. And in the interest of time, again, I'll just do a brief introduction. So Professor Witness will be looking at social sciences researchers on dearth of scientific knowledge for policing stock theft in Africa, and he'll be presenting a South African rural criminologist critique. Professor Maluleke, Professor Witness, is a distinguished senior lecturer. He's renowned for his expertise in higher education. He has a stellar track record of excellence, and he brings a wealth of experience to this webinar. His proficiency spans education, pedagogies, and corporate investigations, looking at fraud and corruption. He's committed to advancing knowledge and fostering critical inquiry. He's poised to leave a significant mark in academia as well as in criminal justice. And his dedication to unraveling societal complexities underscores his role as a thought leader as well as an academic trailblazer. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Witness Maluleke at this time. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you, Prof, and good day to everyone in the house. Prof, just for the record, do you hear me that side? Am I audible?
Yes, we're hearing you quite well.
All right, Prof. Okay, let's go straight to it. Is my screen visible? It's just being
beamed now? Yes, it's also
now?
visible, Professor. Yes, it's visible as well.
All right, let's go to it, colleagues. My presentation is on social sciences researchers on depth of scientific knowledge for policing stock theft in Africa, a South African rural criminologist critic. This research came after realizing that it's over a decade since I entered the arena of investigating, policing, and researching on stock theft. And I have come across many studies that suggest that this area of work, there is a dearth of literature, there is dearth of research, and thus I'm here to argue that that is no longer the case since we have been doing the research or multiple research on this subject. My presentation outline will be as follows: introduction and problem formulation, stock theft realities in Africa, local and international networks created by Mr. Willie Clack of UNISA, selected snapshots of latest stock theft studies in South Africa and other African countries, methodology, identified key themes, recommendation to improve the identified study themes, as well as the conclusion and recommendation. With that said, on point number 1 on introduction and problem formulation, from the Afrocentric perspective, the presentation in question uses African seminal scholars on a discourse of stock theft to try to present that this is a form of a rural crime, and the existing notions that suggest that this crime is under-researched by academics and researchers in the field of criminology, criminal justice, and social sciences, or other stock theft association is non-existent, in a sense that this area of research is no longer neglected. There are many researchers that have started to research on it around the world, and citing International Society for the Study of Rural Crimes, for example, Center for the Rural Criminology or Center for Rural Criminology, as well as other various African and international seminal researchers that are trying to make sense of this study field. Therefore, it is very misleading to learn that there are limitations on researching this subject. Submitting that there is limited research. I believe that research is out there, but it might be scattered in a sense that we are not collaborating enough in African context to present the nature and extent of this crime. So this paper comes with different views and try to offer possible solutions to divert from the unfounded misinformation that is being disseminated by African scholars in this subject. We need to understand that stock theft in Africa is a major issue within the agricultural sector and rural areas largely. And the established commercial farmers as well as the emerging farmers or subsistence farmers, they suffer from this scourge. And this crime is becoming a growing problem in Africa largely, and then it is compounded by serious complicities to effectively address it. and it is becoming common, organized, and sophisticated to police. These pose challenges which are social in nature, and the criminal justice is failing to contain it effectively. Furthermore, if we look into the realities of stock theft in Africa, we learn that stock theft is on the rise in South Africa, and in Africa largely. We are sitting with larger number of stock theft being repeated in South Africa, and for example, KZN and Eastern Cape occupy or accumulate about 45% of accidents that happen nationwide. And these are not the only provinces that are witnessing steep increases of stock theft. We have Gauteng Province, Northern Cape, and Limpopo Province. So in essence, we can summarily say that South Africa is facing dual threats of presented by stock theft, in terms of the livestock farmers feeling the pledge in relation to the economic loss, stability, and serious emotional and physical turmoils. So rural communities in South Africa, their livelihoods, lives, food security, and biosecurity is being threatened by this crime. And worryingly, we learn that by African academics, they disseminate information on this subject in an isolated manner, and then multiple disciplines, they come into make sense of this crime, and we don't have specific discipline that looks into it. For example, criminology looking into it. We have agricultural science that will come to make an understanding of this crime, and economics as well. Another thing that we need to learn is African, in large, in considering the stock theft subject, is not receiving much needed collaborative attention from researchers. Going forward, we learn that various countries in Africa, they are witnessing this type of crime: Nigeria, Ghana, Tanzania, and Ethiopia. We talked to Lesotho, bordering Eastern Cape as well, which are regarded as a hotspot of this crime in South Africa. Another worry is the livestock production in Africa has been on the rise in the recent years, and that is being threatened by this crime. And this includes countries like Kenya, Madagascar, Mozambique, Swaziland, and Zimbabwe within the SADC countries. So crime in African rural areas, including theft of agricultural commodities, farm attacks, farm theft, rhino poaching, cross-border theft of livestock, remains common. Moreover, if we look into the local and international networks created by Mr. Willie Clack of UNISA, we have Criminological Society of Africa, which is CRIMSA. The president is here as well. This relationship, we have seen us even publishing a special edition on rural crime. And furthermore, we have Koti and Kepin of Savannah Safety and Security Magazine. We have Cecile of UNISA. We have Prof. Minar, Prof. Annie of University of Limpopo, Lobart of University of Free State, Brigadier Kobus of SAPS, Coristain of RPO. Those are the local networks that are trying to bring sort of an understanding into this crime. And commendable to Mr. Willie Clack, he always makes sure that he analyzes the statistics nationally, so to ensure that we really understand what is happening nationally and provincially in terms of segments. And international cooperation, talked to Prof. Donna Meyer of International Journal of Rural Criminology, Dr. Kale, Dr. Alistair of Center for Rural Criminology in University of New England, Dr. Harris, Dr. Emmanuel, who just presented now, Dr. Wallace, and Dr. Wallace has been with us trying to make us write subject concerning rural crime, and that is highly commendable as well. We have some writings, that are published under his guidance. We have Prof. Bagley, we have Dr. Omeste Benedel of Nigeria. So these networks colleagues are trying to show that there is movement on this subject, and that is by the work of Mr. Willie Clack, and that is highly commendable. These are some of the selected snapshots of latest stock theft research studies in South Africa and other African countries. At Tshwane University of Technology, we have other master studies by Maluleke, which looks at community involvement to police this crime or combat it. We have Komako again at TUT, who looks at trying to analyze stock theft in Free State Province. And the same Free State Province we have researchers like Lombard, who is always active on that, Dr. Lombard. And we also have Cecil, who have done a magnificent study on criminological assessment and sample specific profile of perpetrators. This is one of its kind study that was done with UNISA under the guidance of Prof. Annie. If one can have that study to read, will understand the dynamics of stock theft in South Africa, and she interviewed the incarcerated offenders to get the motives of why this crime is on the rise in South Africa, and that is highly commendable. Again, we have Pasiwe at University of Fort Hare, who looks at the socio-economic impact of this crime on victims, and we have Mula, University of Free State as well, who looks at magnitude of livestock theft and the related factors. And when we search other databases like open access thesis and dissertation, we get more studies in African quarters that looks into this subject. PDF drive, full PDF, National Electronic Thesis, Dissertation, Portal, Google Scholar. By a message, you get over 70,000 studies on livestock theft in Africa. With that tag, you get more studies. That shows that there are studies, but then they're isolated in terms of trying to collaborate together as African scholars. The methodology of this study, we looked into the two provinces in South Africa, Limpopo, and it was confined to Limpopo and KwaZulu-Natal province. And then it was qualitative in nature. It used evaluative research design. About 113 participants were selected for this study. And this was added by looking into available non-empirical research studies or systematic reviews that looks into stock theft in African countries. And then the semi-structured interviews looking at the key informant and focus group discussions were employed, and the inductive thematic context analysis was used for data analysis. These are the themes that are gathered in this study. Theme number 1, the alleged dearth of scientific knowledge on this subject should be refined and revised. Theme 2, improvement on limited African collaborative perspective on stock theft need to be staged, or it is thought. Number 3, the importance of establishing mechanism to transfer knowledge, management, and share strategies of understanding stock theft prevalence in African context is lacking. And then these are the recommendations to respond to those identified themes. 1, we need to share our knowledge as African scholars on this subject. We need to form debating forums. We share our ideologies on how to better look into stock theft, to look into rural crime as African rural criminologists. Like what is happening now with the standpoint of African criminology, it is trying to make noise compared to stock theft research. So we need to follow suit and ensure that the decolonization of this subject come alive. Another thing is to ensure that we are collaborate as African scholars to initiate new opportunities for networks and research collaboration and partnerships. We need to ensure that the knowledge management is adopted to improve our collaboration and knowledge sharing. We need to understand stock theft in African rural context. while using the lenses of South African rural criminologists, as Mr. Dr. Emmanuel shared, like Kenya and South Africa reportedly leading the pack, as well as Nigeria in this instance. So we need to use those countries as blueprints to share knowledge. African research incapacity and inadequate resources should be urgently revisited or revisited in a sense that we need to improve the available skills, knowledge, expresses of responding to stock theft. That talks to the practice in terms of the police work or law enforcement agencies. We need to look into community policing, intelligence-led policing, situational problem-solving policing, proactive and reactive evidence-based investigation to ensure that what we write as researchers, they implement that or put that into practice. In conclusion—
1 minute remaining, Prof. 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Prof. In conclusion, we learned that quality research in African environment need to be fully supported by all relevant stakeholders. Joint African intelligence gathering need to be staged, and the unverified notion of stock theft being under research in Africa should be buried, and the close partnership and collaboration should be encouraged. All researchers that are interested in rural crime should foster collaboration. Information about any event in African context that talks to rural crime need to be shared, and the relevant stakeholders should need to participate in the local criminal justice system, and the African Rural Crime Hub will need to be established, looking at what Australians are doing in terms of Center for Rural Criminology. Thank you, colleagues. Those are some my details and my numbers where one can try to contact me, and then the said collaboration can come alive. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you so much, Professor Maluleke, for that presentation. Another really insightful, timely, and topical discussion on rural crime. Some of the takeaways or some of the information that you've mentioned are certainly they are pertinent to my part of the world in the Caribbean. So I want to commend you for a wonderful presentation. Briefly, Prof looked at the scattered nature of research on rural crime in Africa, and he's arguing that it's not that there's a dearth of scholarship on rural crime, but that it's scattered and maybe we need to have more collaborations. He looked at the impact of stock theft on communities. He also looked at the multidisciplinary nature of research on stock crime. He intimated that we should have some deeper connections to examine rural crime. And he also looked at what the available literature in a local and international context. So to the audience, I trust that you are making your notes and that you have your questions ready for the discussion section. So I urge you to hold the questions. We'll get to that time when we will be indeed taking questions. So once again, thank you, Professor Maluleke, for that wonderful presentation. Our next presenter is Mrs. Cecili Doorewaard, who will be referred to as Cecili. She's from the University of South Africa, and her topic looks at livestock theft and its victims, forsaken entities, disregarded consequences, and a need for recourse. Cecili's research is groundbreaking in contemporary criminology as it relates to rural crime, more so stock theft. Her work provides a new, a fresher, a more contemporary perspective on offender profiling and sheds light on a topic that is often overlooked. And this is a global topic where research on rural crime is overlooked. So especially in urban-centric context, she offers unique insights into offender motivation and patterns through her investigation, and she illuminates the socioeconomic and cultural factors that drives rural crime. Her paper is a timely one, and it explores the overlooked ramifications of livestock theft, but more so on victims, as well as the shortcomings in addressing their cases within the criminal justice system. And she puts forward key arguments to examine barriers that hinders victim support, and she also proposes several mitigation strategies. Again, I think that this is a really wonderful topic for discussion novel topic for discussion in this webinar, and let me hand you over to Cecili for her presentation at this time. Just to remind Cecili, you have 15 minutes and we are running up slightly behind time, so you will get a notice when we have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you very much, Program Director, for that very kind introduction. My presentation is quite short, so hopefully I will make it in time. Okay, good morning, afternoon, and evening, wherever in the world you are, to those in attendance. Today I shall be speaking about livestock theft with a focus on the victims and the many challenges they have to endure at the end of the crime. So just to give a quick background, my discussion draws on research that I'm currently undertaking as part of my PhD study. The topic developed as part of my wider research project that I did for my master's degree on the profile of livestock theft perpetrators. During the former research project, it became clear that there is an immense need for the victims of livestock theft to be heard and be supported by the very institutions that are supposed to protect them. Hence, I believe the time has come to turn things around and give dedication to the often forgotten victims of this debilitating crime. Now, to put the victim at the forefront, one needs to understand the context of the crime, which includes insight into the crime and the offender. I just want to note a few findings from my previous study to put my current discussion in context. As you can observe from the slide, the perpetrator's choice of victims are mainly based on information they have received rather than knowing the victims themselves. They also have some form of knowledge or background on livestock. This group is heterogeneous and they use various methods or equipment to gain access to the farm. As noted, some of them carried weapons such as guns, and there were also isolated cases of the use of violence or threat of violence. This slide just shows some of the findings on the motives and causes pertaining to livestock theft. However, my focus is on the victim today, hence this is just for your interest or note-taking. As stated in introduction, my current study, which is still in its infancy stage, focuses on the impact and the after effects on the victim. This includes farmers, but it may also extend to the workers who sometimes may directly fall in the path of perpetrators. And as Dr. Bunei has stated, that there are many different definitions of what a farmer entails, and some might not see themselves as farmers. So therefore, mainly my discussion point of departures are those who are directly impacted financially, emotionally, and on a psychological level, which is not a prominent feature within the confines of the criminal justice system. On my previous research, I found that victims find it difficult in reporting cases directly to the South African Police Service. Their cases are constantly postponed, where they often have to drive miles to attend a court session only to hear that it would be postponed again. This not only impacts them financially, but their emotional and psychological stress is immense. It has also been highlighted in other researchers' work that prosecutors rather find reasons not to prosecute than looking for reasons to prosecute. Some of the consequences are not addressed enough to make a significant impact towards the prevention of this crime, especially in supporting victims. Firstly, less and less farmers are keen to continue with livestock production. Some sell their farms and venture into other forms of financial support. Neubacher confirms that there is a correlation between the fear of theft and experience thereof and food security. Now, aside from the financial implications, farmers are often confronted with the most heinous crime scenes, where animals are left mutilated and dismembered. In some cases, the animals are still fighting for their lives when farmers come across the scene. The question then remains, what psychological impact and trauma does this leave individuals with? One must remember, these farmers are not trained specialists or exposed to everyday crime scenes. Other research, such as that of Smith, on the stress factors contributing to the stress of farmers in the UK, has noted that the role and impact of factors of agriculture crime is lacking. Moreover, in some African countries, the seriousness of livestock is less than trivial on the radar of those that are tasked to defend. This fuels further implication, which is resources allocation. There's this perception that rural crime is less serious, or it occurs less than urban crime. Thus, less policing resources are allocated to man and patrol the target areas. Speaking of skewed perceptions, farmers are reluctant to report cases of livestock theft due to mistrust in the criminal justice system. This can and does lead to cases of vigilantism, especially in poor communities, often taking the law into their own hands due to the perceived or real notion that nothing shall be done. By implication can have wider and more serious consequences down the line. Victims feel forgotten and neglected by the criminal justice system, especially when it comes to the rights of the offender in court. In many cases that I've heard, speaking to victims, offenders often get out on bail or receive a warning and continue with their criminal careers without even thinking twice about what they should have learned from the experience. Observing the so-called disregarded consequences and specifically looking at the misconceptions which not only affect livestock theft, but rural crime in general, is that the view that those working in the criminal justice system do not have the necessary knowledge when dealing with cases of livestock theft. For example, the livestock theft units in South Africa are equipped to deal with these cases, but following protocol, victims are obliged to first open a case with the South African Police Service before it reaches the specialized unit. Thus, in the victim's experience, more needs to be done to create awareness among police members, not only about the seriousness of the case, but how such cases should be handled. This permeates to the judiciary and correctional services as well. It has also been known that both prosecutors and magistrates alike are unaware of certain terminology used to refer to livestock. More so, they often lack insight into what a cow, sheep, or goat really means to a farmer. It cannot be equated to a car or any other object that has either been robbed or stolen from the person. These owners know their animals by name and can identify them as they would a loved one. Consequently, the relationship between the victim and the criminal justice system is strained, and therefore recourse is necessary. Now, I end off my discussion by stating that victims of livestock theft and those in general of rural crime have long enough been put on the sideline, both within research and practice. Therefore, the aim should be to identify, address, and find solutions to restore the balance between all stakeholders involved. including the responsiveness of the criminal justice. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Cecili, for that wonderful presentation. You took me back to my days as a PhD candidate, which was quite a long while ago. And indeed, I want to urge the audience to pay attention to what Cecili has presented and to offer her suggestions and ways that can actually improve the final product of her dissertation. And, you know, it also reminded me of a much used maxim in the criminal justice system, more so the judiciary, that justice delayed is justice denied. So a brief or the brief takeaways would be the need for victim support. As we said, it's a PhD study, and this would hopefully improve Cecili's dissertation. So she looked at livestock theft, but with a focus on focusing mainly on crime. She indicated that quite often in the South African context, that the victims of crimes are in the context of rural crime, that they are overlooked. And I was quite happy to see the approach that she took to illuminate and to give some sort of voice to this often under-researched group of individuals. She spoke to the time and distance that victims face in terms of having to lodge reports of criminal victimization, non-prosecution by the prosecutors, who often look for ways of not prosecuting rather than prosecuting. And I dare say that this is a common phenomenon in Trinidad and Tobago as well. She also spoke about the heinous nature of the crimes, farm crime, and how it takes an emotional toll and can negatively impact the farmers. And, you know, she also looked at the need for recourse to victims. Indeed, we must pay attention to our victims. So, Cecili, thank you for that presentation. And, you know, I want to wish you the best with your PhD dissertation. Our next presenter is none other than who I refer to as the Right Honorable Willie Clack from the University of South Africa. Let me just give you a brief insight into his presentation. Willie will be looking at navigating farm crime relations between farmers and police in rural South Africa. And his presentation, Willie's presentation, is really an interesting one, as with the other presentations. So Willie describes himself as an aged academic figure grappling with the intriguing intersection of farming. Willie, among other things, he's a farmer, but also an academician, and he's known for his research regarding stock theft and rural crime in Africa. Today, Willie will look at that complexity, the complex landscape of farm crime in South Africa. And, you know, his discussion, as I mentioned earlier, is navigating farm crime, relations between farmers and the police. And indeed, I can guarantee you that this presentation will be mind-blowing. So Willie brings a wealth of experience to the discussion that we're having here today, and his exploration of the paradox between agriculture and policing aims to unveil critical insights for understanding the challenges that farmers face in Africa. As we anticipate Willie's contribution, we embark on a journey to unravel the dynamics of rural crime and the evolving relationship between farmers and law enforcement agencies. And indeed, this again is a global challenge and one that faces us as criminologists and as farmers in the Caribbean. So I hand you over to Willie in anticipation of another well-crafted, timely, and topical presentation. Dr. Clack.
I do thank you, Mr. Program Director, and thank you for the introduction. I just want to ensure are my screen visible to everyone?
Yes, I'm seeing your screen and we're hearing you loud and clear, Dr. Clack.
Thank you very much. yeah, as you say, it's quite a controversial topic. And yeah, I never thought that I would say this, but a lot of people know that myself and my wife have been victims of farm crime and a farm attack just about 7 months ago. So yeah, I had to look into my whole academia and take a decisive step as am I going to continue with this research or I'm going to stop it? But I decided, okay, I'm going to continue. And yeah, the pictures and things I show you, as some of them is personal from my own farm and others is unknown pictures from wherever. What I want to do is I want to just give you a brief overview of the aim of my study. Then let's review a little bit on the research methodology, the findings, and then just a brief discussion as to what I'm going to do. Because I have a lot of slides, in the beginning I will just move very quick between the slides, because otherwise when I get to the findings, it's going to be a problem. The aim of the study is to study the relationship between farmers and the police in South Africa. There's access to how effectively the police are meeting their constitutional duties. And then the examination highlights the importance of the public perception and acceptance of police authority in perceiving social order and upholding democratic values. That is the main aim of this particular study. When we quickly just look at the features of South Africa, we must realize that we have a remote rural area, and we have some big cities, but we have some small cities. And a lot of us do think that Johannesburg is a very big city, but we don't realize that it is only the 11th largest city in Africa. There is 10 larger cities on the continent. And we also here working with the less dense populated areas than in urban settlements. Victimization is quite difficult to measure accurately, and underreporting of crime always leads to a dark figure of crime. And then there's also scant anonymity of police works in the smaller rural locations. We find that police come from the same locations where they work, and that creates a bit of a challenge. And then we have the rural-urban divide of our police stations in South Africa. If we look at the different provinces, you will find there, and this is just for interest, the number of police stations which are classified as rural and some which is classified as rural-urban. I did not include the urban police stations. Another very controversial fact in South Africa is that we don't know how many farmers we have. So what I did is I went onto the SARS website and the academic or the Stats SA website and found that we have 39,623 VAT registered farmers. If you go into the agricultural census, you will find that with the number of farmers that you can pick up there and you can calculate, around about 233,000 farmers. And then we have the non-VATs, which is then around about 200,000. So this remains a controversial thing because we don't know exactly how many farmers do we have, how many secondary farmers we have, etc. But that is just an indication. A brief literature review. The relationships between farmers and police and between citizens and police is an old studied topic. We find that the first times that you look it up, is you will find that it's been studied since 1988. You will find a lot of references, and then you can carry on through the literature and find that this is a common field of study all over the world. Even in South Africa, we have the study of Guy Lamb down at University of Stellenbosch. And then people that's been here today in this meeting is Alistair, Arkness. We have Kyle Mulrooney from Australia. I think Cameron Whiteside is also in the audience from Australia, New South Wales Rural Police. They've done a lot of research on this. And then we have Jessica Peterson, who is currently the president of the International Society for Rural Crime Research, also doing a lot of research on this topic. In her case, it was in the United States. When you look at Tankebe tells us that when we study the legitimacy of police, we need to look at 4 specific topics: procedural, lawlessness, police effectiveness, and then distributive justice. We also need to look at the perceptions of safety and then the fear of crime, which has been studied by Vanya and Robert Smith and Cressida and all those. And then we have the Solomona study here in South Africa and in Africa, which is quite interesting. So what we're going to look is look at the procedural justice, and we're going to look at the distributive justice, etc., and then have a discussion on prevention, combating, and investigation crimes from the South African Police Service. The methodology, we all used the same questionnaire. We adopted it all over the world. The original study was done by Alistair Harkness and Larson down in Australia. They distributed the questionnaire to all of us. We adopted it for our own rural and our own circumstances. And this is the second time that I'm doing this study. The previous one was just too lengthy, and we reduced it a little bit and recirculated the study to South African farmers in March and April of this particular year. The questionnaire is mainly quantitative, but there was one qualitative question that is not addressed within this particular presentation. Then we distributed via all means of electronics devices, via the farmers' unions, via databases that we know, and it was kind of like a snowball sampling in the different agricultural structures. The challenges we had, or that I had with this, is gatekeepers, people that simply say, I'm not going to do any research anymore on the police. I'm not going to assist you. I am fed up with all this and I don't want to be involved in anything, so I'm not going to complete any questionnaires any further. That was a big limitation. And then the availability of internet in the rural areas. And then I also used some of my academic friends, and we came to know that there's the cost of data for a lot of people is extensive. So that was a big limitation, and then also the understanding of crime categories, which I will touch on a little bit later. Then the number of respondents we had on this one is we had 991 respondents from all over the country. I'll check on this on the findings. When we look at the victims of crimes, we see that 79% of farmers in South Africa indicate that they have been a victim of crime, and 21% indicate that they have not been the victim of crime. When we look at the exposure to theft, specifically the crime of theft, that was the categories, and I will look at the most important ones in the findings, but we can see livestock theft is on the top of the range there. We'll look at the others later. When we look at violent crimes, you get an indication here that robbery is a big problem, but I will also address that in the findings. But those are all the violent crimes in the last 4 years that people has been exposed to. When we get to safety perceptions and fear of crime, it's quite obvious here that when you look at the orange lines in the different graphs, is that everyone in South Africa is fearing crime. And from a farmer's perspective, the biggest fear is things being stolen from outside of the farmhouse. When we look at crime reporting, has been quite obvious that we have the Victims of Crime survey in South Africa that was run and is still run for a number of years. But the last time that any rural crime was included in the crime reporting was in 2018, when they found that 77% of stock theft is not being reported. We look here, we see that the farmers, the 991 indicated that they 40% kind of like all the time report, 20% say often, quite often. So we can have an argument here and say that around about 60% of our farmers do report crime. And then 32% would say occasionally they do report crime, depends on the crime, what has been committed, and then 10% say they never report any crime. The reasons for non-reporting, I would discuss this in my findings as well, but it's obvious that 82% of the farmers believe that the police would do nothing about the crime, so that's why they don't want to report it. When we look at the confidence levels, we can look at police legitimacy. We're looking at trust and obedience. And there's 4 aspects that I said I'm going to look at: as procedural justice, distributive justice, police effectiveness, and then lawfulness. Procedural justice, there is the definition of it, but it speaks to the idea of fair process and how people's perception of fairness is strongly impacted by the quality of the experience and not only the result of these experiences. And there's 4 ways to view it, and we look at the voice, neutrality, the respect for treatment, and then trustworthiness. When you look at procedural justice, you will see that all the categories is around about red and very dark red. And we have very few green and very few blue. So we have a problem with our perception regarding procedural justice, and I will get to the individual ones a little bit later. Here's some more on procedural justice that you can have a look at. And when we get to effectiveness and lawfulness, that is where we look at how the police is achieving the officially sanctioned goals, their constitutional obligations, and the lawfulness, which means that the police comply with the Constitution, the statutes, and the statutory and professional norms. Here we once again see that we are in all the categories in the red, with just a few differences between the 4 categories that have been measured in this particular sphere. Distributive justice in South Africa, we do have a problem. How fair are the people perceiving justice to be distributed? And we have a lot of minorities, and that may create a problem when we do assess the distributive justice. There is the different ones that we indicated, and you also see that most of them are red, but I will do that. I will focus on that in my findings. And then the sense of obligation. In a previous study we've done, and I've written a paper on this, or a chapter on this for a book, and a lot of the editors consistently ask me, is this true? If your farming community don't trust your police, how are they then obeying everything that the police is telling them to do? And I had to kind of explain this, but the only finding is that it's cultural in nature, that South Africans, is by cultural means, obliged to adhere to police orders. Then the findings of the study, our distribution is very, very poor when we get to the number of respondents. We had a very good response from Northwest Free State, Limpopo, and Gauteng specifically. Very poor response from the Western Cape. And I spoke to farmers down there, and the only conclusion that we can get is that the Western Cape is maybe in another world. They don't want to participate. They think they're not part of this, and they are not so much exposed to the crimes. 79% of the farmers have been exposed to crime in South Africa. When we look at the exposure, 51% exposure to livestock theft, 37% to equipment and tools being stolen, farm supplies 34%, and farm produce 25%. Violent crimes, when you look at those, robbery is 36%, assault 13%, and then murder 6%, and other crimes 20%. The other crimes, because we didn't mention them, the farmers here indicated specifically things like cable theft, arson, and those kind of things that they mentioned there. We have a problem with a high prevalence of robbery, and this is the same as in the United States. Farmers do not have a problem that they do not understand crime categories. And that has also been found by Donnemeyer with the Amish. 85% of our farmers in South Africa live in fear. That's quite a significant. And then when Solomona found that 38% of people in South Africa, that is a combination between urban and rural, is living in fear. Milbacher found that 68% of people in rural Tanzania is living in fear. So it does seem that fear of crime is a big problem. When we get to the non-reporting of crime, and we do see that a lot of people fear revenge. If you look at the background picture here, you will see there's a lot of cattle that's been killed by poisoning in the Bray and Ghanesa area in 2023. So there's a big concern about revenge. Procedural justice, the biggest problem there is that police cannot be relied on when you need them. 38% or 46% they believe that that's strongly agreed, and which means that 85.9% of people in the farming community shares this opinion. The police treat people fairly. There we have a 69% one on people that not shares this problem. Lawfulness pretty much goes the same, and you will see that in all these categories, the community does not trust the police. They do not believe there's distributive justice. And I said this already in a meeting with farmers. I encouraged them to participate in this study, and they just said, I cannot trust the police. I don't want to participate in anything that they are involved with. When you look at this distributive justice, you will find exactly the same. And 80% of farmers do not believe that the police treat them fairly, but that may also be due to cultural diversity in South Africa, which is a considerable challenge. I've already spoken to the obedience, that farmers will obey the police when they do get instructions from them. When you look at the discussion, we will need to seriously look at the fear of crime in our rural areas and try to reduce it, but that is mainly due to the fear for farm attacks in South Africa. We do see the studies of Smith and Hart and etc., that these crimes are really affecting the mental health of our people, also the wealth of our people. We will need to look at the Constitution, specifically Section 205 and 206, regarding the good relationship between farmers and the police. These farm crimes do pose a significant challenge to economies and communities. My recommendations is that we will need to do a lot of research in the fear of crime. We will need to do research on the mental effect of these crimes on our rural victims. Then the new study of Cecili is also attaching to that. We will also need to look at new measurements to evaluate our police effectiveness in South Africa. Statistics is not the right measurement to look at success. And then we need to look at the other side of the coin of the study as well. It is very important that we will look at the police perceptions of farmers as well. We cannot only look at farmers' perceptions, and we will again write to CRIMSA and ask them to please assist that we can get students that will do research on the opposite of the current study that I have completed. I hereby want to thank the farmers, and I want to thank the police. For many, many years, I had a very good relationship with a lot of police officers who put in a lot of effort every day to make a success of their work. And all I want to say is I salute you for each and every effort, for every day you put in. And thank you very much. And thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Clack. Thank you so much for your presentation. I just came on to tell you that you had 1 minute remaining, but you read my mind, and you concluded in a timely manner. So let me take this opportunity to thank all of the persons that I've heard thus far. I've partially heard Dr. Mulrooney, I've heard Emmanuel, Prof. Witness, Cecili, and now Willie. Thus far, all of the presentations have been really wonderful, and it is much needed research. I think this webinar is much needed, and I'm hoping that at some point in time that it will be expanded so that we can include persons from other jurisdictions. So quickly, just to recap, Willie spoke about navigating farm crime, relationship between farmers and the police in rural South Africa. Again, this is another important component of academe, in that you often find that there is a disconnect between those persons who are there to protect and serve and the constituents. So it's really interesting to see the findings from Willie's presentation. As he said, it's important to also look at the perceptions from the other side, from the side of the police. He spoke to a host of data stemming from 1980s to the modern time by a range of scholars. I think part of the challenge is that the data is a bit scattered in the African context. He also spoke about the high levels of victimization, typologies of victimization, perceptions of the police, procedural and distributive justice, the crime categories. He mentioned the study challenges, participants not affected. I think it was in Western Cape. Quite often you find participants who may not be impacted by crime or particular phenomenon, that they tend to be averse to participating in some of these studies. And it seems that this might have been the case in Western Cape. And, he mentioned the lack of understanding of crime categories. And sometimes as you move among different bodies of individuals, you'll find that happening as well. He also mentioned the statistical challenge, which is something that Professor Witness Maluleke mentioned. Finally, he also mentioned about the impacts on farmers and their emotional well-being. And again, this is a recurring theme, as Cecili had mentioned this previously. Thank you so much to all the attendees. At the risk of being brisk, let me thank all the attendees. Without you, this webinar would not have been possible. So thanks to all the webinar, all the participants for attending this webinar and for taking time off your busy schedules. Your questions and comments were truly appreciated. To the panelists, it's really difficult to leave here today after hearing such timely, topical, useful, informative bits of knowledge. I thank you so much for that as well. I do not want to take up the role of Willie, but I think it's my duty as the program director to thank you all for your participation, and to thank Willie, Jessica, Kyle, and others for inviting me from the other part of the world, the Trinidad and Tobago, the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, to act as the program director for this morning's proceeding, or afternoon or lunchtime, wherever you are. So thanks again, and let me officially hand you over to Dr. Willie Clack, who will sum up and end today's proceedings. Willie?
Thank you very much, and I just always want to correct the people is I'm not a doctor. I am not a professor. I am just a human being. Thank you very, very much. And from my side, being instructed by the International Center to arrange a webinar in Africa was quite an interesting endeavor to try and find speakers, to try and find people to be involved. So that brings me at first to thank you, Dr. Wallace, for being available, for you guiding us and directing the program so very, very well on our behalf. Then to all the people from South Africa that attended, that we do know, all the police officers that are here, we commend you. And I wish to acknowledge 2 or 3 police officers in South Africa that has been in the audience, and that is Brigadier Tata, who is in charge of the stock theft unit nationally of the South African Police Force. Brigadier Swartz, who's in charge of research at the South African Police, for his attendance. And then from the farmers' side, the representatives of the farmers' unions being here. I can acknowledge that I saw Dr. Jane Bays from Free State attending, but already excusing herself. And then some people of the media that are also recognized being here. And we do know that we can rely on you, and this message will be then brought forward. Then to all the presenters, it's strange how life goes, but we are all interconnected. Myself and Cecili, myself and Witness, and myself and Emmanuel. I can budge that I've written academic papers with all 3 of them, and I think that the newest or the latest one that we are busy with, and Witness will submit this next week, is the one on the influence of widowhood on widows on stock theft in the Eastern Cape, which is going to be a very interesting paper that we did write together. With any further ado, and without any further ado, we will see if we cannot organize a rural crime conference again in South Africa, or in Africa for that matter. And also thanks to all the international academics that was here, specifically Rob, Matt Bowden, all those people, and the fact that they do acknowledge in the chats that they have learned something. Without any further ado, I finally hand over to the program director just to close, and thanks for everyone's participation and the good contributions we had from everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Willie, for those kind words. Thank you to the attendees. Thank you to the presenters. It's indeed a pleasure being here and learning about rural crime in Africa. I simply want to let Willie and the team know that they are not alone in terms of the work that they're doing on rural crime, farm theft, etc. And I would really like to ask them to continue this good work that they're doing, and to potentially create that knowledge via potentially a text on rural crime in Africa. I think it would be really something that's worthy. Professor Witness can attest to the fact that we have been doing some work on rural crime in global context. And this is an opportunity for us to all network in the aim of producing scholarship that is not only for promotion's sake, but scholarship that is aimed at improving the lives of humanity. So with that, thank you to everyone who took time off their schedules, whether you're a farmer, police officer, academician, student, etc. Thank you very much for being here today. The webinar was very much interesting, and you all have a really wonderful and a blessed day. Thank you.